All right, so the preceptor qualifications, a preceptor has to be licensed. The funeral director has to be licensed for 2 years before they can take a preceptor. How many interns, a funeral home? Oh, somebody else just popped in, so that's good to see. As far as, let's let them connecting to audio. There we go. All right, we got a third. All right. So as far as how many interns, a funeral home can have 2 interns, regardless of how big or small they are. Josh, you work at a particularly large funeral home, and this never made sense to me. I've always felt that, if you do 100 calls a year, it's one thing. If you do 1,000 calls a year, it's another. But they only allow a funeral home to have 2. If it's a company and the funeral home owns 3 locations, let's say, they can have 2 per location, so long as they do that minimum number. And the minimum number is 25 calls a year. And that is excluding like stillborns and infants. And the feeling is that if you were there for 3 years, you did the first 2 years, 60 credits, plus the year of funeral service education. And if you did every single funeral and embalming, that would give you the 75 and 75. And that's where that comes from. Internship specifics, time, the cases, the background. Again, it's that idea that you need 60 credits. If you have, so at that point, the minimum is 2 years. If you have 90 credits or more, they'll drop that down to 1 year. The cases, the 75, 75, and 25. And then that background is is that idea that you need the 60 credits. You can do the internship during it, but that is a concurrent internship while you're doing that. Internship extension, you can extend your internship. Like I said, by default is 2 years. You can get a 3rd year with just a simple request. Sorry, the kids are just doing wacky stuff in the background. The extension, like I said, you can get a 3rd year without a problem, and you can extend it longer than that. In most cases, if you request an additional 3 to 6 months on top of the 3rd year, they normally give it to you. Now, if you fail the state board practical, you have to wait at least 30 days before you can take it again. You have to pay the fees again. And remember, to take the state board practical, you have to have everything else done, 75, 75, and 25, the schooling, the national board, the state board, and be within 90 days of finishing your internship. The concurrent internship is, and we always think of this as concurrent because, like, if you look at Pennsylvania, you have to wait until you're done schooling to do the internship. In New Jersey, that period while you're in school, while you're doing mortuary classes, that's not really a concurrent internship. The concurrent internship is during the initial 60 credits before they can issue the academic qualifying certificate. It's a weird thing for all practical purposes. Yeah, you're doing a current internship, but yeah, it's by their definitions, it's only during that first 60. All right, so new for 2019, they changed a bunch of these things 2 years ago. Preceptors cannot be convicted of a crime in 5 years. I guess after 5 years ago, whatever. And this crime, if it is a crime that they would say you can't be a preceptor, it has to be related to funeral service, meaning that you emptied your pre-need funds and took it down to AC and threw it on black and it came up red or something, right? Or a crime of moral turpitude, meaning that, no, I didn't feed the dog, no. Sorry, I would have, I just didn't think of it. The crime of moral turpitude is, rape, murder, that type of thing. Cannot have revocation, suspension, or surrender of license from any professional board that's both in and outside of the state, meaning you go to Florida and you lose your license. Well, they're not really going to, want you to be a preceptor up here in New Jersey. Now, the intern application is now available on the state board's website. It used to be the preceptor would have to request it in writing. They'd have to send us a letter to the state board just to get the application. They switched that in 2019. Convictions and arrests. New in 2019, licensees are now required to notify the mortuary board in writing within 30 days upon conviction of any crime. So it used to be, we would always look forward to the new licensing period to look at the minutes of the state board because you could see everybody who got arrested over the last 2 years for whatever reason, so like a DUI or something, Now it's within 30 days. You have to tell them. It used to just be for relicensing. And this includes any arrest, summons, indictment, admission and pretrial intervention, guilty plea to any violation of law, ordinance, felony, DUI, misdemeanor, disorderly offense in New Jersey or any other jurisdiction. So even if somebody gets like a disorderly conduct, they can give to you for anything. I mean, spit on the ground, they give you a disorderly conduct. That tends to be what they use for college kids or being drunk in public, things like that. But that has to be, you have to disclose that to the state. They don't care about speeding tickets. DUIs, they care about. Speeding tickets, they don't care. So you get caught doing 15 or 35, they don't care. Move some of my things around here because it's in my way. There we go. So new for interns and preceptors again in 2019. State board clarifying intern responsibilities. And they said specifically what interns supposed to be doing is participating in funeral arrangements, preservation, washing, or disposing of dead human bodies, making funeral arrangements on behalf of any licensed practitioner of mortuary science. I mean, not just your preceptor, but any licensee, quoting prices when funeral arrangements are being made. And preceptor is responsible for reviewing and executing a statement of funeral goods and services with the intern before providing it to the consumer, meaning you make the set of arrangements. Well, your preceptor comes in, looks it over and goes, okay, it's all fine. All right, this is good. Maybe you want to change this, whatever. Interns and advertisements. If an intern in an ad or website or social media is to be listed as John Doe, New Jersey intern registration number, and you have to list your number on there the same way they have to do with licensees. All right, so when you're taking the test, keep in mind the different forms of ownership. There's the corporate style. And again, regardless of it, you have to use the manager name, title, and sign, etc. One of the things to look up, and like I said, I intentionally did not put the dates in here because I normally, or the time frames, I normally have those. If there's a death of an owner, how long do you have to name a new manager? If there's a new installation, and a new installation is a new business, meaning that you buy Brand X Funeral Home. Well, the state board has to come down and do an inspection. It's basically they're issuing a new certificate of registration. It's a new business. Smith Funeral Home, which has existed in this town for 110 years, moves one block down. Well, according to the state, that's a completely new business. If you close a funeral home, look into what's required with closing a funeral home. They require certain things such as covering up the sign, turning off the telephone, designating somebody to take the records because the records still have to be available for 7 years, ensuring that the EDRS account is shut down. An unlicensed owner, you're allowed to be an unlicensed owner. I used to use the example when I was a kid. It was my dad owned the business. My parents owned it. My dad was licensed. He died in 1985. My mom went to school for 3 years, got the 60 credits, went through the mortuary program and then ended up getting licensed. But during those 3 years, she was an unlicensed owner. And that's perfectly fine so long as you have a manager name, somebody who's coming in and doing all of these things for you. All right, pre-need, you're definitely going to see pre-need. This stuff comes up. You need a license to sell pre-need. There are certain states, Florida jumps out to me, where you can be unlicensed and sell pre-need. Pennsylvania used to be like that. It was a train wreck. Anytime I picked up, I lost someone. Anytime I would pick up a file that was pre-need sold by somebody who was not licensed, it was a mess. It would be like, somebody who was selling cars last week and is selling funerals this week, and they just wanted to get the sale. They just wanted to close it, to close on that and get the check. They didn't understand funeral service. I think having unlicensed people sell pre-need is bad news. Signatures on forms. Take a look at what forms are required for pre-need, because for any pre-need that you open up, whether that be insurance or trust, you need to tell people specifically where those funds are going, and you need to tell them how it's going to be held. And you have to fully disclose this, is it revocable? Is it irrevocable? Everything has to be disclosed to them in black and white. And trust accounts, we'll talk about them in a bit. You're allowed to use trust accounts, it's fine. That's probably the most common. If there's a change of funeral home, this is another thing to look at. They love to write questions about this. How long do you have to change to switch the funds over. So you get a phone call from, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, and they don't like you anymore. They want to use your competitor. How long do you have to get those funds? Change the funeral home on that. Damn, off the top of my head, I can't remember if it's 10 days or 2 weeks. I want to say it's 2 weeks, but look it up. That's why I leave all this stuff intentionally blank so that you're forced to look the stuff up. And in practical standing, from a practical standpoint, normally just get a letter from Choices going, oh, you lost this call, which is terrible. If you ever buy a funeral home, you deal with a lot of this because when the old owner leaves and a new owner comes in, a lot of people switch out on you. But from a theoretical standpoint, take a look at how long you have to do that. Now, the pre-need ledger, they changed this in 2019, and they said you can keep a digital copy of it if you'd like, which is really the easiest thing to do, because now Choices just shoots out an email. Oh, no, here you go. Here's your ledger for this month. But what needs to be in that ledger? And for each individual account, and it's like sort of the name of the person. And again, look this up because I don't have it all written in front of me. When I'm doing class, I've got it all written there, and I've got my notes so I can confirm it. It needs to have like the person's name, the date that it was open, the amount that went in, the amount that's in there now, how much has accrued since then. Cancellation fee, no, you cannot have one. You cannot have any cancellation fee. Other parts of the country are not like this. I really fully agree with this. The idea being that you're putting money aside, but when the funeral happens, it's a whole new, don't mind my dog barking by him, it's a whole new transaction. And if they came in and wanted a solid bronze on a 3-day viewing, and now they've changed their mind and they want direct cremation, you have to do that. They change their mind, you have to give them back all their money. It's good. I've seen people burnt when they move from, let's say, Florida back to New Jersey, and they've made pre-need arrangements elsewhere, and now it's their, they all they get back is the initial amount that they put in. A lot of times they don't even get any of the interest. It's bad news. Again, 100% pre-need trust. I made a set of pre-need arrangements once. It was like 3.5 hours. You don't get anything for that. It is what it is. If they choose to go somewhere else, you're stuck. It's 100% pre-need. All that money needs to go into the trust, and if they change their mind a day later, you lose out. But that's life, right? That's business. All right, so trust issues. These are important numbers to keep in mind. So 200 accounts. If you have a trust and you have a master trust, right? Like Choices, you can open up a trust on Bob Smith. That then gets fed into the master trust that has like $300 million. It's got a ton of money in it, and that works well. It helps accrue additional interest that wouldn't be there otherwise. Now, less than 200, you can't take any money off of the total amount. With 200 or more accounts inside of that master trust, you're allowed to take 1% of the interest earned to pay for what needs to be done. At that point, it's a large enough operation that you're going to need somebody to run it, right? You've got to pay them. They're not going to do it out of the kindness of their heart. So at that point, you're allowed to take 1% of the interest. Never anything from the corpus itself, never anything from the actual body of the money that people put in, but from the interest. Now, with commissions, if you're talking about an insurance policy, if there is a newly issued insurance policy, like if you get an insurance license and you go out and you sell insurance to somebody specifically for a funeral, that's fine. You can take a commission from the company. If you are taking, an insurance policy that already exists and you're either converting that over into a trust, or you are changing the owner on it, or, well, in New Jersey, you're not really allowed to be the owner, but if you're changing it over to make the state of New Jersey the beneficiary and the funeral home the absolute assignee, you cannot take a commission on that. It's not a policy that you issued. It's not a policy that you wrote. Finally, POD accounts. Again, still used. I've had students over the years that tell me they still use POD accounts, just payment on death accounts. You can open one up at a bank. You walk down to the bank and say, here's the total of my funeral. It's $10,000. They go, okay, great. We'll create an account for you. You put in money when you need to. And then when the death happens, just bring a death certificate down and we'll cash it out for you. So again, new in 2019, must notify social services when any refund on an irrevocable prepaid funeral. It used to be $500 and up, meaning that you direct a funeral, it's an irrevocable. When everything is said and done, there is, $20 left over in the account, right? It performed well enough. There's $20 left. You have to notify social services, and social services is going to go after that family for that $20. If it's 35 cents, they don't care. They're going to go after them for it. It used to just be, they would give you a grace area of like $500 or under. Not the case anymore. All right, advertising. This again is another one of those big areas, Sorry, I'm just trying to get this thing out of my way. I've got the dumb little, I guess it won't let me go to the side, whatever. All right. So with advertising, you have to use the name as registered with the state. You can change it to whatever you want. You just need to go through that process of actually changing the name. So if you are Smith Funeral Home and you want to be Smith Memorial Home, you need to go through the process of changing the name. You can't just run out and change it on the sign and say that's that. And the manager has to be listed on all advertising. And again, this can be, you can switch the manager to be the executive director or senior director at the funeral home, but you have to pick one and stick with it. Now, with novelty items, and again, all of this information, take a look at all of the information that's required on an advertisement. Because they want the name of the manager, they want their license number, they want the address of the funeral home, they want the telephone number. All of that has to be listed in any ad, and they've extended that to the website and any social media. Now, novelty items, if it's a small novelty item, a pen, let's say, or I had an uncle that used to make teas, like golf teas. And it's so small, you can just put a little bit of information on there. So they just require the municipality and the funeral home name. So, in this particular case, it's Bud Funeral Home, Woodbury, New Jersey. They used to take these things out by the handful and throw them out in the tea box or whatever you call it. The logo on an obit. Now, this is something that is regional, I think, because you don't find this as much, I think, in North Jersey as you do in South Jersey or even Central Jersey. I found an example of this. They basically said, if you're running your logo in an obit, then you need to put, that's considered an ad. And number one, the family shouldn't have to pay for it. Number two, it falls under all advertisement for the funeral home. So let me, why is this not coming out? It's not on. Oh, that's wiped up. I found a good example of this earlier. I just need to find one. There we go. So here's an example I just pulled from the Courier Post. I find this a lot in the Courier Post, more so than most other funeral homes. So in the print version, they will have this symbol here, right? And again, I think the world of folks at Gardeners. I'm friends with Jim and Wendy. Jim's, in fact, on our advisory commission. So I'm not picking on them, I'm just using them as an example. In the print paper, and as well as online, they've got this little logo here. Well, that costs money. And they want to have their logo in there because they want people to see it and recognize that it's Gardner Funeral Home. But they basically, what the state said is this area in print, no, you can't make the family pay for that. You have to pay for that. And this, you need to have all the information that is required in a regular ad, right? So they've got the manager's name, they've got her license number, they've got the address, town, telephone number. But when they send something like this to the newspaper, they get two bills back. They get one for all of this for the family, and then one for this, which is specifically for the funeral home. And people were getting a little outlandish with it. I think the law changed in like 04 or 05, and it made sense. People were putting in these huge, elaborate advertisements, and you just couldn't expect the family to have to pay for that. That just wasn't fair. Meeting controls, share this, go. All right. Testimonials. If you're using a testimonial for a funeral home, it has to be somebody who actually used the funeral home. You can't have, I know I've seen like I remember when Cliff Lee was playing for the Phillies. He was in a bunch of ads for FC Kerbeck, the dealership. He may have bought a car there. He may not have. I don't know. But if you wanted Cliff Lee to be in an ad for the funeral home, he has to have used the funeral home. There has to be evidence that he actually used them at some point. And whether this be a famous person or not, it has to be somebody who used them. Price reductions. This is a weird one. Well, basically, they say if you're going to advertise with the price reduction, it has to, number one, be an actual price reduction. It can't be, wow, if you come in and open up an insurance policy and you only pay for half of it, but then you die, well, look at that. You got 50% off. You can't have it like that, number one. Number two, if you're advertising with a price reduction, it has to have been that cost 30 days or prior. Let me explain this because it's a weird one, and they've really gotten some weird minutia on this. So let's say I've got a casket that I sell for $300, right? And I one day decide to run an ad, and I go, wow, you know what? I'm going to raise this up to $600. But if you come in and you buy this casket, you prepay, or if death happens, and this happens the next week or whatever, I'll sell this to you for $300. You know, so I'll just sell it to you for $300 and you'll get a 50% discount on that. But that's not really the case. The cost of the casket was $300. You just raised it up to $600 and then dropped it down to its original cost. So if you were going to do this, you would have to raise the cost of the casket and wait at least 30 days. And then after that 30 days, you could do that. And again, like I said, this is really where they get into the minutia of it. All right, so here's another example of an ad or no bit. And this one I just pulled randomly from the newspaper. This is one of the ones that was in print. Again, nothing against the Chinuskis, perfectly fine folks, but they have to put everything in there because it's considered an advertisement. All right, advertising includes some weird stuff. It includes aerial displays. I went to Wildwood in August with my family. It was wonderful, man. Spent a lot of time on the beach and just had fun with the girls. It's wonderful. But all those aerial displays go by, right? I couldn't imagine advertising a funeral home that way, but whatever. If you did so, you'd have to have all the required information. Circulars, handbills, flyers, any letters like direct mail are sent out, or any other similar item, document, publication, or device used to communicate to the general public or to a specific group. New in 2019, all advertising regs extend to funeral home website and social media. So if you have a Twitter page or Facebook, or what are the kids using these days, TikTok or whatever, right? You got to have all that information on there. I don't even know how to use TikTok. I'm close to being a boomer on this one. All right, so fines. It's not a bad idea to take a look at the pages for fines and just see what the averages are. Now, the maximum the state board can fine you is on a first offense on anything. They can fine you $10,000. On the second and any subsequent fine for the same infraction, they can fine you up to $20,000. All right, interment, basic concepts around interment. The depth of burial. And again, it's good to go back and look at it, but they require that the casket be at least, if it's not in a vault, it has to be at least 4 feet in the ground. The top of the casket. Let me specify that. Hold on. Let me bring up the page here real quick. All right. So let me erase all this. So, all right. So this is the ground. Okay. That was very terribly drawn on my part. I apologize. So the top of the casket. So let's say we have a casket here, right? I keep losing you, Shahid. You keep dropping out on me.
So I'm on my phone. The Wi-Fi is in and out.
Okay.
So I'm about to walk in the house in 10 minutes.
Okay, that's fine. I am recording it all, so you should be able to watch it after the fact if need be.
Okay.
Oh. So the top of the casket has to be at least 4 feet from the top of the ground itself. And the way I always remember this is, I know it's not exact, but you think casket's roughly 2 feet high, right? It puts you 6 feet under, right? At the bottom of the casket. The top of the casket has to be at least 4 feet underground. Now, this is only if you don't have a vault. If there's a properly constructed vault, it's fine. You can have it completely up here at the top. There's no restriction on it whatsoever. But if it is an unvaulted burial, the top of the casket has to be at least 4 feet under. Temporary burial, this is again, one of the things you rarely see, but if somebody's being buried and let's say they're building a mausoleum, like they're going to build a mausoleum next year. Okay, you can bury somebody temporarily, but it has to be marked like that from the get-go, meaning at the outset on the burial permit, it says this is a temporary burial. And they give you up to 4 years on this, right? 4 years. And if that's the case, a funeral director doesn't even have to be there to move the decedent. The cemetery can just do it on their own, but it has to be marked as such. And you have to be staying inside of the same cemetery. Multiple burials, if somebody is being, this is saying like 2 people in a casket, that's perfectly legal. You have to have the permission of, and this one is a little bit different than the normal burial as far as the who is in charge. The decedent themselves can give permission for this. And the legislation is written like this in case, let's say you have a terrible situation where a mother is giving birth and she dies and she's dying and she says, if child dies, I want to be buried with the child. That's sort of why it's written that way. So that gives the authorization to do so. And then that follows the normal line, you know, of the right of selection in that or right of control, excuse me, of you know, the next of kin, the spouse, the majority of the children, the parents, siblings, etc., and so forth. Now, disinterment, if you have multiple people in a grave, it's a multi-depth interment, right? So let's put another one here. Boom, boom, boom. It's not a very good sized casket, but you get the point. If you're going to disinter this person, you've got to get all the permission to disinter this person too, right? Because even if they're just coming out and going back in, they're still being disinterred. They're still being removed from their place of burial. So you have to get 2 disinterment permits for both of these people. Disinter consent, you need the consent of the spouse and all adult children, which is strange. And that's a weird New Jersey specific thing. The spouse has all control prior to the burial being happened, or the burial, I'll say. And then once the burial happens, all of the children can basically get involved and outvote the spouse if they wanted to change things after the fact. All right, so cremation, when you're getting ready for the national, look at crematories and all of that's the physical side of it, and how the heat and the temperature and, you know, everything else is involved. With the state exam, it's not as involved, specifically because we're not allowed to own crematories in New Jersey. Obviously, you need now here's where it gets a little bit weird. You normally need a presence of a licensee to have a body cremated. During the pandemic, they relaxed this and said, all right, interns can take decedents to the crematory, which made sense. You know, for like 3 weeks there, it's kind of scary. And you know, it was bodies sort of piling up everywhere, and then things sort of went back to normal. But you know, record keeping, there's a whole bunch of record keeping that has to be done by the crematory. I know this is outside of what you would normally do, but take a look at that. What information does the crematory need to keep? Because they need to keep things like you know, the name of the deceased, date of death, the cause of death, what was the disposition of the cremated remains. In that, did they give them back to the funeral home? Did they give them to the family? Do they have a side service where they take them and scatter them at sea? Unclaimed cremated remains. Remember, after a year, you can dispose of them if you dispose of them respectfully. You have to do your due diligence in contacting the family And what's recommended is sending a certified letter, actually sending two, saying if you don't contact us by whatever date, we're going to have these cremated remains, we're going to dispose of them. And you can't just take them and toss them in the garbage, but you can take them and have them buried. You can scatter them. You can do something proper with them. But so long as you go through that steps, it's perfectly fine, because every funeral home has a ton of these things in them. All right, statement of funeral goods and services selected. So new for 2019. Statement at the top, this statement is subject to change by agreement of both parties. I don't know if you're going to see any of this on there. This is so new, but I'm just including it anyway. So they just put a statement at the top that's saying, wow, we can change our mind if we decide. If both parties agree that that's perfectly fine. The check boxes for sex was removed. So it was male, female, and things got complicated regarding sex and gender and that type of a thing. So they made it a little more open-ended. Well, all right, if somebody's, I don't know, non-binary or something, you can write that in there. Sanitary care without embalming is changed to other prep of body. Use of facilities and staff for viewing has been shift to use of facilities and staff for visitation. They added the line use of equipment and staff for graveside to the line, including accompaniment of remains to place a final disposition. Now, I'm kind of doubting you're going to see questions on this, but we just never know. I figured I would bounce it off of you guys. It's been 2 years since I put these changes into place. When I spoke to Mr. Smith, my predecessor, when these changes first went through, he said it normally took 1.5 to 3 years to see these changes make their way onto the tests. So receiving and forwarding remains are on different lines, and they've also switched optional packaging service section. If an optional package service is selected, categories 1 through 3 are not applicable. To if you select an optional package, see general price list for a list of included services. And the first question everybody asked was, whoa. If we're going to change that, can we then write somebody up as a direct cremation, but include a memorial service? Because remember, if you're doing a direct cremation, you're not supposed to be doing any services with that. And the answer is no. The state came out and made an announcement about this. Said, no, it's not the case. You can't, it's a direct cremation is solely that, a direct cremation. We just changed the verbiage on this. So yeah, we will not allow you to add like a memorial service to a direct cremation, because direct cremation is supposed to be solely that. If you're doing a memorial service, you're supposed to write up all of the services, basic services of the funeral director and staff, transportation of remains, et cetera, and so forth. And if you want to discount it down, that's fine, but you can't just write direct cremation and then memorial service or whatever else you're doing. Other minor stuff they did: clergy and church changed to officiant place of worship, newspaper notice to obituary charges, the line for pallbearers has been removed, but you can write that in there. They give you an area that you can write it. Price reduction removed, but can be written above the grand total. Let me show you what I mean by that. I'll have to share another screen here with you in a second. Which one did I put this under? Here it is. All right, so you see this area right here, total estimate of charges. They used to have price reduction printed in here. Now, you may not be using a package. It might just be a straightforward thing, so there's no reason to have that written in there. But if you want to, you can write price reduction. So I know the funeral home I work, they have packages that they use, and you may save $400 or $600 or whatever it is, and I would write that in there with package reduction and write minus $600 or whatever the case may be, and then I would write the total up. And again, this is where they took out like pallbearers used to be in here and such. You're allowed to write that in there. You can absolutely write that in other, right? You can put whatever you want to in there, but they removed that. So miscellaneous stuff, where to file the death certificate. Remember, there's 3 municipalities. You can do that. You can do that in the municipality of death, municipality of the funeral home, or municipality of disposition. You can get the death certificates issued at any of those, plus the state of New Jersey, but you cannot file at a state level. And the idea is if I file at a local registrar, they're going to know stuff on there that somebody at state level wouldn't. Like, is this person actually listed in this town, but they actually live in this town? Like, I know I live in Cinnaminson and we share, I'm sorry, I live in Riverton and we share a zip code with Cinnaminson. And a lot of times people will put the wrong town in there. And the idea is a local registrar would be more likely to realize that and be able to make that change. And cost of the permit is $5. Used to be 15. They actually dropped it down to 5. Actually, they're done building EDRS. If you rent your funeral home to another, nobody does this the proper way. The way that it's done from a practical standpoint is you call Brand X Funeral Home and go, look, hey, do you mind if I rent your funeral home? They go, yeah, fine, whatever. Shoot them a check and you call it a day. In reality, you're supposed to get a special use permit. And it's supposed to be a funeral home renting another funeral home, not a funeral director. So I myself actually, I guess I could do it because I am the manager of the funeral home at the school, but if somebody were to rent another funeral home, it has to be the funeral home renting the other funeral home, not just, oh, I'm a licensee, I'll rent the place down the street when I have a call, because that would mean the person wouldn't have the paperwork that they need, right? If you have a funeral home, you have to have a GPL, you have to have statements of funeral goods and services, you have to have casket price list, out of burial container price list, everything else that goes along with that, right? So it's a funeral home renting another funeral home, and you need to send a letter to the state board requesting permission to do so. And you're not allowed to use another funeral home more than 3 times a year, another building, I should say, more than 3 times a year, unless it's a place of worship, a church, or like a fraternal building like Masonic home, or a government building. If it was just, you could have a funeral in somebody's home. But if you're going to do that more than 3 times in any given year, they have to become a funeral home. Otherwise, why the hell are you having so many funerals there? Give it to church. Yeah, church is going to have more than 3 funerals a year. A fraternal home will as well, the Masonic home or Knights of Columbus or whatever. And likewise, the same with a public building. If somebody's laying in state, then yeah, that's fine. But if it's a private home, you can't do it more than 3 times in a year. Receiving vault. This is something to look up. It's easy for you guys. Back in my day, we had physical books we had to read through. You just highlight that, drop that into a search in the statutes and the regulations. It'll give you everything you need to know about a receiving vault. Receiving vault is a very antiquated concept. I've never used one in my career. I know when I asked my predecessor, Mr. Smith, he said he saw one in the early 1970s. This is for an area that if you're going to go and it's February and the ground is too cold in which to dig into, you would keep them in a receiving vault at a cemetery until the ground thawed. This is much more common in the north. You get up to the Dakotas or Maine or something, right? So basically, there are regulations for receiving vaults. They have to either be underground or designed in a way that they prevent the escape of noxious fumes. You're never going to deal with this in your career, but it's just something to look at for testing purposes. Another odd one that they popped in a couple of years ago, this was them being just a knee-jerk reaction, which I think was a real dumb thing. Every funeral home has to have clear, white, or flesh-colored adhesive tape. So what this was somebody went into a funeral, they noticed down the side of either a blouse or a suit coat that somebody had plastics on, and they had taken duct tape and taped the plastics down, and they noticed it and they filed a complaint. And so the state board just put the statement out saying, well, every funeral home has to have clear, white, or flesh-colored adhesive tape, to which everybody said, what the hell is flesh-colored? And then they're like, oh, each community will decide on their own. But okay, but that makes no sense. But as long as you have clear tape somewhere in the funeral home, you're fine if the inspector ever shows up. Welfare versus Medicaid. Remember, if you're dealing with a welfare or Medicaid funeral, it's really not a Medicaid funeral, it's a welfare funeral. We call it Medicaid, and a lot of times we have to deal with adult Medicaid, quote unquote, the adult Medicaid office. Look at the amounts. The amounts are different. for like a stillborn, like 1 to, I think it's 14 days. And then, no, excuse me. It's a stillborn and it's 0 to 2 years old. And then it's 2 and above. And the amounts are different. For adults, it's 2246. And I want to say it's 535 to the cemetery, maybe 545 to the cemetery. My wife would know this. She was here. She fills out this paperwork all the time. And then the family can contribute 1570. But look at those 3 different amounts.
Isn't it 524 for the cemetery?
That sounds right. Yeah, 524. Yeah. And I said, if Jen were here, she stepped into the other room. She fills this paperwork out all the time. I've asked her so many times. And I mean, this has been the same amount for like 15 years. And I've asked her this like 30 times, but whatever. So the forms to use. So this is odd. I always say, like, look out for both sets of forms. It's the same form, but what they did is they changed the name on it. And then for testing purposes, I've had students come back and tell me they've seen both of these. All right, so text. Originally, it was the why am I blanking on this? The PA 11. And they changed this to the WF and J 11. Oh, what just happened? All right, I've got a weird close. I don't know why this is not closing. I've got a Norm Macdonald bit coming up for some reason. I don't know why that's not closing, but whatever. Anyway, so PA was Public Assistance 11. Work First New Jersey was a program. Work First came in during the second Bush era, during George W. Bush. This is a national thing. They said, okay, we're going to switch over welfare to Work First. The idea that, okay, yeah, we're helping out, but you should be looking for work. The form itself is technically the WF, the Work First New Jersey 11, but PA, public assistance, is still popped up in questions from what I've been told. So keep in mind both of these when you take the test. Where is claim submitted? It's done at a county level. And I know, like, when I would deal with Burlington County, they were pretty easy to deal with. Camden County was always much more difficult because there was a larger office, more claims came in. They had much stricter policies. So that's done at a county level. All right, so concepts that don't matter anymore but could pop up: emergency burial permit. It used to be if there was a long weekend, right? A long holiday weekend, and let's say it's Friday and everything is closed on Monday, and you put on a call and the family, for religious purposes, needs the person buried within 2 days. What you would have to do is go through a judge to get this done, and they could issue you an emergency burial permit. So the way that it used to be is you would take a death certificate and you would take that down to the registrar, and they would look at that over and say, okay, you have our permission to bury this person, and hand you a burial permit. Like I said, in a long weekend situation, you would have to bring a judge in and they would have to issue it for you. Not really the case anymore because of EDRS, but just something I want you to be aware of as a just in case. If no person is in charge of a cemetery, then it falls to the funeral director to file the paperwork. Communicable disease, list and reporting. You have 12 hours to report a communicable disease to the Department of Health. I have the list in here. It's smallpox, cholera, plague, things like that. Now, this is such impractical information because if you contacted a Department of Health with the information that you had a body of plague, they wouldn't know what to do with it. It's just something that's in the statutes. I had a student that had a body with cholera, and they're like, yeah, we didn't do anything with it. We didn't know. And they're like, yeah, and even if you did, if you called somebody at the State Department, they wouldn't know. It was cremate the person or whatever. I don't know. Reporting veterans' death. Again, a weird situation that you'll probably never deal with. If you have a person, a veteran that died outside of the state of New Jersey, and say they die in Pennsylvania, you bring them into New Jersey and you're going to bury them And you're going to bury them in a cemetery that has nobody in charge, like one of these small little old municipal cemeteries. And there's one I used in Riverside. There was one, nobody even buried in there since probably the early 1970s. But somebody could be. And normally in those situations, you have to call like a grave digger to come out, maybe the vault company or whatever, and they dig it out and you have somebody buried there. There's normally nobody in charge. It's normally like you're filing the paperwork on behalf of the cemetery. If that's the case, that you have number one, a veteran that died outside of the state. Number two, you are going to bury them in a cemetery with nobody in charge. It is then incumbent, it then falls to the funeral director to notify the veteran, the VA official at a county level of the death and burial. And here's the idea. If they died within the state of New Jersey, EDRS would notify the VA, right? When you filled out the death certificate. If there was a cemetery official, they would notify the VA. Since neither of those exist, then it falls to you to notify them so that on like Veterans Day and Memorial Day, they can come out and put like the flags on the graves, and they can keep track of where the veterans are buried within that particular county. Again, a situation you will never deal with, most likely, but something they put on the books. So it's good to know before you take that test. EDRS, these are kind of older notes. EDRS, you guys, I'm sure, are familiar with EDRS. So burial at sea, right in the book for, in the supplement and in the book for principles of funeral service, there's a breakdown of what you need to do if you bury someone at sea. And I can't remember what all the specifics are. Like I said, I leave them all out of it, so you'll look it up. There's so much ballast you need to put in. There's so many holes you need to drill in the casket. Take a look at that and know that before you go in. Again, you'll probably never deal with this in your career, but signatures on a death certificate and for a disinterment permit. On a disinterment permit, there's 7. You should know the basics of it. I don't know if you're going to need to rattle off all 7. I kind of doubt that, but it's. Let me see if I can remember that. It's the person requesting it, the next of kin, the funeral director, the owner of the grave space, like whoever owns the lot, the cemetery official from the second cemetery, and then the registrar. I got it. So. Like I said, it's not a bad idea to at least just know what's involved with the disinterment permit. Likewise, signatures on the statement of funeral goods and services, who signs that, any FTC forms, as far as what does the FTC require, their disclosures and their disclaimers. And there's, depending on how you argue, it's really 6 or 7 of the disclosures that need to be on the general price list. And if you don't have it, let me know. I can send you the that purple book. I've got it digitized, which is the FTC funeral rule for funeral directors, and that explains everything as far as the FTC is concerned. That's good for the state test, but that's really good for the national, because that's one of the books they use to write questions. All right, UAGA, this Universal Anatomical Gift Act. This is the idea that if somebody gifts a body to a school, whether that be us or Robert Wood Johnson or wherever, they're bequeathing the remains to us. They're not, if they show up, let's see, casket must weigh down 150 pounds. Okay. It's like I said, it's good to look all that stuff over for this and the national. Not something you're going to do most likely, but something they like to test doing. So let's say somebody comes back, they donate a body to Mercer, let's say. A week later, they change their mind and they call me up and go, I want to have mom back. I want to have her buried or whatever. When have service, I can say, no, go pound sand. It's too bad. I would never do that. I would happily return the remains to them. But in theory, I could say no. And this is done because certain schools, certain programs will take a decedent. Like I know one, we're working on getting this table thing. Professor Aldigis I think she got an approval on. I think it's like an $85,000 table. And what they do is they take a bunch of bodies, and they freeze them down, and then they shave them down a little millimeter, like off of the nose, and then slowly down, and they deconstruct the entire body, and then they create a digital version of it. So like from a classroom standpoint, this thing looks like a table that looks like an iPad, right? It's a really big iPad. You can say, oh, I want to see the vascular system. Boom, it just brings it up. I want to see the skeletal system. Boom, it brings it up. I want to see the whole decedent. I want to go through it. And it's digital recreation. Now, if you're halfway through that and the family changes their mind, what are you going to tell them? You know, medical waste, the basic concepts of regulated medical waste. What is medical waste and what isn't? Remember, the standard rule of thumb is if it is soaked through with blood, then it is medical waste. If something has a drop of blood on it, it's not. Well, what would you do in your house, right? Even if somebody has HIV or hepatitis C or something, they prick their finger. They're not going to take a towel or a Band-Aid and have to create a medical waste bin to put it in. Basic wills terminology, and that all goes back to the law class. You know, what's involved with wills, the different types of wills, executing wills, exactly what is the term, who is in charge of that, you know, whether that be an executor, an executrix, an administrator, an administratrix, never say that word, but. All right, so again, something that's never going to affect you, but you should know, at least for the test, prohibited embalming compounds: arsenic, lead, mercury, zinc, silver, antimony, chloral, any poisonous alkaloid. And the statute actually widens this and says copper and cyanogen. We don't make embalming fluid. I'm not whipping up a batch of this stuff in my tub, you know, but for whatever reason, they include this in the statutes. It's good to know, and then you can promptly forget it as soon as you've done that test. I think that's the last slide, if I'm not mistaken. No, I'm sorry, communicable diseases in New Jersey: smallpox, cholera, yellow fever, typhus, plague. So if you have a body with any of these, you need to contact, in theory, you need to contact the health department within 12 hours and let them know. Again, if you contact somebody at a health department, I don't think they would know at all what to do with this. I've been fortunate. I've never dealt with any bodies with these. I embalmed 4 CJD bodies in my career, but I've never dealt with anybody with any of these. But I did have a student that had a body with cholera and said, yeah, we just took them and had them cremated, you know? Yeah, that's it. Okay, give me a second, sweetie. But yeah, so that's it. I'm going to take this information. You can sit on my lap while I'm talking. I'm going to take this video, and what I'll do is I will put it up onto the same page where everything else is. MCC funeral service program, and yeah, she's fine. She's fine. So and I'll make it open so anybody can see it. Don't touch it. Anybody can see it. If you want to share it with anybody, if you want to, that's fine. I normally make the other videos locked down in a way that you need the link to see it. But with this, I'll put it up there so anybody can see it. Yeah, best of luck with the test. It's what, a week and a half from now, I believe, next Thursday.
Yeah, it's on the 7th.
Yeah,
Okay. Okay, fantastic. Good luck, man. Good luck, guys. I wish you the best on it. I'm normally not on campus on Thursdays, but if you get a chance to shoot me an email, let me know how you did. I'm not looking for questions or anything like that off of it. Just let me know how you did, how you felt about it. Now, in normal times, I would be in touch with Cindy and normally get the results within about a week. She's not in the office very much right now, so it's hard for me to get those results. If I can get the results, I will reach out to you individually and let you know how you did on it. But it's you may hear before I do. And if you do hear, let me know how you did do on it, you know, because I like to keep track of all of this.
Gotcha.
All right. All right, fantastic. Take care. Any questions or anything like that? I don't want to leave you guys hanging about any of the material.
I'm fine.
Okay. Shahid, you good?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right, fantastic. Well then, like I said, keep me apprised of what's happening on your end, and best of luck with it. I hope you guys have this in the rear view very soon and are on your way to licensure. All right.
Professor,
Thank you.
before you go, I have a question.
Sure.
If you could probably, you don't have a recorder, but just about the stuff I sent you, emailed you.
I have not seen it. I am still fighting with my